Generación Consciente. Un movimiento que busca conectar e inspirar a los líderes de nuestra región, basado en los 4 pilares del capitalismo consciente. En esta ocasión, hablaremos acerca de uno de estos pilares, liderazgo consciente. Los líderes conscientes comprenden el propósito superior de sus empresas. Tienen la capacidad de relacionarse con las personas de manera asertiva y propositiva. También son capaces de entender el impacto de sus acciones en el tiempo. Un líder consciente tiene la inteligencia emocional para poder pensar en los demás y siempre tendrá una mentalidad de crecimiento. Para que una organización pueda alcanzar su propósito superior, debe tener un líder consciente que se encargue de guiar a sus equipos y asumir su rol para generar confianza e inspirar a los demás. Aquí veremos cómo es el impacto positivo en una empresa y sus stakeholders al tener un líder que siempre motiva y fomenta la cultura consciente. Acompáñanos a conocer diferentes herramientas y acciones para que las empresas y organizaciones sean vitales en la transformación positiva de nuestra sociedad, aportando así al bienestar de todos.
Hoy entonces nos vamos a enfocar en uno de los 4 pilares del capitalismo consciente. Vamos a enfocarnos, después de este repaso, en el liderazgo consciente. Y para hacerlo tenemos justamente al líder global de uno de estos movimientos, el CEO de Conscious Capitalism Inc., que es la organización que coordina y dirige los esfuerzos locales en el tema que se dan alrededor del mundo. Hoy los acompaña a ustedes en esta hora de conversación Alexander McCobin. Alexander se graduó de Filosofía y Economía en la Universidad de Pensilvania. Tiene una maestría en filosofía en Georgetown, en Washington, y es reconocido desde antes de convertirse en el CEO de Conscious Capitalism por ser el cofundador, de esto hablaremos más adelante, de Students for Liberty, una organización de voluntarios que agrupa más de 2.000 grupos de estudiantes en más de 100 países y que busca ofrecer la mejor formación posible a los líderes del mañana. Es momento de saludar a Alexander. Alexander, good morning.
Good morning, Jorge. I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm doing fine also, Alexander. Thank you so much. Alexander, let's start with your job. What day-to-day tasks are involved in being the CEO of a movement that needs to change the way we think about business?
So the amazing thing is that every day is different for me. And in some level, there are certain things that I'm doing over and over again, talking with incredible business leaders like yourself and everyone listening here, in speaking at conferences like I'm about to do at WOBI in Colombia next week, which I'm so excited about. But in between there, it's different challenges and opportunities all the time because I talk with business leaders from so many different industries and so many different countries facing their own unique opportunities and challenges in applying conscious capitalism to their own work. And that's what's one of the things that's so exciting about being a part of this movement, that these ideas of elevating humanity through business transcend industry, size of company, nationality, and are universal. So there's an opportunity for business leaders of all types of companies to lean into a more conscious approach and build this movement to make conscious capitalism the norm.
Alexander, before delving a little deeper into the topic of conscious leadership, I would like us to touch on your previous experience as a founder, as I mentioned earlier, of Students for Liberty, that organization that brings together more than 2,000 students groups on 5 continents, fostering the formation of leaders, but with a question that is intended to be, let's say, optimistic. With that in mind, do we have, you think, a next generation of leaders well prepared to lead the changes this planet needs?
Absolutely. So to share a little bit more about my background, before conscious capitalism, I led several different lives. I was entrepreneurial as a teenager, starting and running several small businesses, both for-profit and nonprofit. But I wanted to make a difference in the world. I cared about principles like justice, morality, dignity, and respect, and thought that academia was the way to really change things. So I nearly became a philosophy professor. But while I was studying philosophy, there was this pull for me back into the business world, focusing on business ethics. And that's when the book Conscious Capitalism was published. I went out there to do research for my dissertation and was so inspired by the people that I met that I decided that's what I really wanted to do, to help bring these principles to life through organizations and business. So one of the organizations I had started when I was younger was a group called Students for Liberty that was teaching the principles of a free society to young people around the world and inspiring them and providing them with leadership training to go and make a difference in their communities. And I went back to Students for Liberty, dedicated myself full time to it and building a movement of students dedicated to those principles. And what I took away from that was a combination of the incredible power and potential of movements that develop leaders of all types to make a difference in the world. And as you were getting to, that power of the next generation to really transform the world. This was 6 years ago almost when I left Students for Liberty to join Conscious Capitalism, because I believe that conscious capitalism can have the biggest impact on the world as a movement. But that the students from when I was running Students for Liberty are becoming business leaders now. They are running unicorns out of Silicon Valley. They're starting small businesses around the world, and they're taking leadership positions in large multinational firms. And they're bringing with them this inherent understanding of business as something that needs to be purpose-driven and make a positive impact on everyone that they touch, rather than making trade-offs between them. And in some ways, conscious capitalism, I think, is inevitable because the next generations are bringing it with them. But we want to accelerate that change, and we want to empower the next generation of business leaders to be the best business leaders that they can be to elevate humanity. And that's why we work so hard day in and day out to grow the conscious capitalism movement.
Yeah. Alexander, let's go back. In an interview you gave to Forbes magazine in 2017, you said when you took over as a CEO of Conscious Capitalism that one of your main goals was to translate the movement's ideas into practical applications. Which of those applications of these principles are you most proud of?
So thanks for the throwback. I'd forgotten about that interview so many years ago, but it's true. When conscious capitalism was first starting a little over a decade ago, it was originally roundtable discussions between business leaders who thought of business differently from the mainstream. CEOs like John Mackey from Whole Foods, Kip Tindall at the Container Store, Ron Shaich at Panera Bread, who said, we put purpose before profit. And it's not that profit's bad. Profit's a good thing. But it's a means to serve a higher purpose in business. But they were on the fringe in the business world at the time. These ideas weren't understood at all. They were laughed out of boardrooms. They weren't presented at conferences. And so for the first few years of conscious capitalism, the purpose was just to articulate the philosophy. And that relied upon really explaining the theoretical principles of higher purpose, stakeholder orientation, conscious leadership, and conscious culture. And just getting those concepts through to people for a long time. But about 4 or 5 years ago, when I joined Conscious Capitalism, we realized that we had the opportunity to make a pivot from trying to persuade people or just inspire them with the concepts to showing what this looks like in practice to help businesses really implement the principles in real life. Because there were so many questions that leaders had once they said, higher purpose sounds good, what do I do next? And so since then, we have really been highlighting the actual organizations and leaders in the conscious capitalism movement and the particular examples of how conscious capitalism comes to life in their businesses. So for example, at our CEO Summit a few weeks ago, we had Joe Kenner, the CEO of Grayston Bakery, on stage. And he was talking about Grayston Bakery's unique approach to HR, which is a philosophy called open hiring, where when people want a job at Grayston, they go and write their name and contact information on a list in the office, and Grayston, whenever they have a job opening, will call the next person on the list and offer them a job. No interviews, no background checks, no credentials required. They just give people an opportunity to prove that they can do the work, to give everyone a chance in life. And Joe was talking about how this has transformed Greyston to become such a successful company. They make all of the brownies for Ben & Jerry's ice cream, for example. So they're doing very well. And how other businesses might be able to incorporate the principles of open hiring into what they do. We often work with companies to articulate their higher purpose, thinking beyond just how they make money to really why they exist, like Whole Foods' purpose of nourishing people and the planet, or First United Bank, a giant bank based out of Oklahoma that has a purpose of helping people spend life wisely and really goes out of its way to not only create accounts for clients and individuals, but to help people understand what financial education is all about and how to use their money effectively to live out what they really want in life. So there are many different ways it comes to life, and what we're trying to do is show more of those examples, both to make it easier for businesses to understand what this is and replicate it, and inspire more people to go on the conscious capitalist journey by understanding the stories and the human side of business.
Yeah. So Alexander, at the beginning it was difficult, but do you think this movement is mainstream? I mean, the way you think about business beyond just the money?
It's not fully mainstream yet, but we're reaching the tipping point. When the pandemic started a year and a half ago, the Financial Times actually ran a headline cover piece that said, this is an acid test for conscious capitalism, COVID. They said, we're going to see if all of these companies and these organizations like Conscious Capitalism, who have been talking about higher purpose than profit and taking care of all your stakeholders, really follow through on it, or if they're going to revert back to the bottom line to get through the most challenging economic situation we've faced in our lifetimes. And what we saw at Conscious Capitalism, and what every major media outlet is covering and other groups are starting to replicate, is that businesses that were conscious before doubled down on their principles and used it to get through the pandemic. And businesses that weren't conscious before began to realize this is the future. They need to adopt these principles to get through COVID and to come out stronger on the other side. And that's why organizations like the World Economic Forum are now talking about stakeholders and purpose. The Business Roundtable just before the pandemic changed their statement on the purpose of the corporation to adopt conscious capitalist principles. And Fortune magazine and others keep talking about how there's a major shift happening in business. That doesn't mean it's done. There's a lot more work to do. But there's such an opportunity as more businesses realize this is the future for us to help them make this change and to bring more businesses into the movement and into the fold.
Yeah. Alexander, one of the 4 pillars of conscious capitalism is conscious leadership. Raj Sisodia defined this as leadership that is more awake, that understands the consequences of its actions, that is committed to the truth, and is more peaceful and inclusive. How would you define it? What are the main characteristics of a conscious leader?
So I think Raj's definition is on point and a great introduction to it. Conscious leadership, the way that I tend to explain it, is that it's about moving beyond just having an analytically intelligent leader, someone who has critical reasoning skills, is able to make strong trade-offs and in looking at difficult situations, to having leaders that also include emotional intelligence, combining the intrapersonal and interpersonal intelligences, understanding oneself and understanding how to support other people. But it goes beyond that even. It starts getting to having spiritual intelligence, something that Donna Zohar and Ian Marshall define in Spiritual Capital as the intelligence with which we access our deepest meanings, values, purpose, and higher motivations. In other words, our moral intelligence, giving us an innate ability to distinguish right from wrong, or the intelligence with which we exercise goodness, truth, beauty, and compassion in our lives. Bringing that into the way that we lead and support other people, as well as then systemic intelligence, having systems thinking and systems feeling to understand the interconnections between things and the consequences of decisions, so that we can apply that analytic, emotional, and spiritual intelligence to not just 3 people, 30 people, but 300, 3,000, 300,000, 3 million people as businesses impact more and more of them. So in a lot of ways, conscious leadership is about getting to concepts like empathy, care, and love in leadership and bringing that into the business world in ways that they've been kept out of for so long, because being a leader is about taking care of people and making decisions that are going to be best for people, that come from a proactive place of love rather than reactivity and fear, which closes off better decision making actually and leads to worse business decisions when motivated by fear instead of love.
Yeah, Alexander, I like to believe, because maybe my work as a journalist, that words are very important when we are defining concepts. So I would like you to expand a little bit more on your answer and to be more precise with the different terms in the definition, especially what is meant by a higher consciousness that we are talking about in this kind of leadership. I know some of our guests are taking notes, and this seems to me like the right time to repeat and emphasize some of these concepts.
It almost goes without saying that leadership is everything in a company. Better leaders make for better companies. So the question is, how can we elevate our leadership? Traditionally, we've always sought analytic intelligence in leaders, things that you find with IQ tests, critical thinking, being able to make trade-offs in decision making. But conscious leadership goes beyond that analytic intelligence to incorporate emotional intelligence, having an intrapersonal intelligence, understanding oneself, and interpersonal intelligence, understanding other people to be able to connect with them, resonate with them, and work together more effectively. It also includes spiritual intelligence, something Donna Zohar and Ian Marshall define in Spiritual Capital as the intelligence with which we access our deepest meanings, values, purpose, and higher motivations. It's our moral intelligence, giving us an innate ability to distinguish right from wrong. It's the intelligence with which we exercise goodness, truth, beauty, and compassion in our lives. And even beyond that, it includes systemic intelligence, having systems thinking and systems feeling to see the interconnection of consequences of decisions and what we do over large numbers of individuals, so that you can apply that analytic, emotional, and spiritual intelligence across the many individuals that a company impacts. And the way this comes out oftentimes is through certain terms you don't normally hear in business, but really matter, like empathy, the ability to feel and understand what others are feeling, care, having a concern and attention for things and other people, and even love, a passion for others. And these matter because being a leader is about taking care of the people. By definition, that is your role, to take care of and help guide people and support them. And what you think becomes what you do and what others perceive. But even more so, even by traditional metrics of success, being a leader is about making decisions, and using these concepts and this approach leads to better decisions, because it moves us from being reactive to proactive, from leading from fear to leading from love. And psychologically, when we're reactive or we're consumed by fear, a fear of being fired, fear of being judged, fear of getting something wrong, you close yourself off to possibilities, to creativity and opportunities available to you. Whereas when you're proactive, leading from love and from care and empathy, you're open to new ideas, you're open to other people, and you're open to opportunities that you wouldn't have been before. So to start living these out, here are a few tips for what to do. First, remind yourself of your higher purpose and the opportunity you have to serve other people in your leadership role. That is an incredibly powerful reminder to motivate you and guide you. Second, ask yourself, what is the caring thing to do for your stakeholders when you're encountering a difficult decision? Remind yourself that that concept should be a motivator for you, especially when it may be difficult to bring that to the forefront, when other variables and other concerns are consuming your mind. Third, put the interests of the people you're impacting at the forefront of your decisions. think about the implications for all of your stakeholders and the ripple effect that it can have, the interconnection between things, and make a decision about what's going to live out your company's purpose and your purpose for the most of them in a way that creates value for all of them. And fourthly, be passionate, be loving, love what you do, and especially love and be passionate about the people around you as a motivator to remind yourself that you have an opportunity as a leader to do incredible things and support incredible people. And that can set you on the path of developing your own conscious leadership and living it out to the best of your ability.
Yeah. So, Alexander, in the theory of conscious capitalism, they use the expression less of self, selfless, which stands for the qualities that a conscious leader should have: strength, enthusiasm, love, care, flexibility, long-term vision, emotional intelligence, as you mentioned earlier, system intelligence, spiritual intelligence. And I really like that expression because it speaks of a leader which is less focused on himself and more on what is around him. Which of these qualities do you think is the most important one?
Hands down, it's love. For me, everything else flows from that, because love is our passion, our interest, and what drives everything else. That's the source of our empathy and care for others. And as I was just saying, when you lead from love, you're leading from a place of proactive opportunities and connections with people, as opposed to leading from fear of being fired, a fear of being criticized, a fear of something going wrong, whatever it is, and which closes off our creativity, closes off our connections with others, and leads to worse decision making, even just from a strictly traditional business calculation, than leading from a sense of passion and excitement and care for other people and the cause of the organization.
Alexander, and it's not common in business discourse to talk about love and care the way you are talking about this today, and even less so in patriarchal societies such as those in Latin America. Could you give us an example of occasions when leaders can demonstrate these qualities? How do leaders ensure that sensitivity is not mistaken for weakness, for example?
So I actually thought you were going to ask how to make sure that people aren't just using the words without substantially following through on it, because nowadays that's what we see as the biggest critique or challenge, because so many people are starting to adopt this language. How do you see them follow through? And the answer there is to really look at their actions and how they make decisions, referencing the concern for others, putting other people first, and reflecting on their own leadership and their own personal growth to show that love for others. But you're right, there are some people who still think that these words are woo-woo or soft or weak in some way. And that misses the point, that love and care and compassion and these ideas are the origins of our greatest strengths as leaders and lead to the best decisions, because that's where one's passion really comes. It's about doing work and doing great work because you love what you do, as Steve Jobs said, and to love the people that you're doing it for, which leads you to be able to make tough decisions because you know what your higher purpose is that you love, because you care about the people that you're responsible for, and you're going to do the best thing you can for them. It leads to better decision making rather than worse decision making, because it provides a guidance for what to do, and it leads to more creativity and more opportunities to support people than when you're closed off and lead instead from fear and closing things down instead.
Alexander, we have already talked about the characteristics of a leader. Now let's talk about their most common actions. One of the most important tasks of a leader is to create an inspiring vision, a story that is repeated by everyone under his command and that everyone wants to tell to others. Is there a recipe for that story to be successful? How do you get people to commit to this story and to do it?
So at one level, it's communication. You have to keep telling that story, and you have to tell it in different ways that connects with people beyond just the numbers, but the actual impact that vision will have on the company's stakeholders and the benefits it offers to them. But it's more than just communicating it. It's also living out that vision and modeling the leadership that you want to see from everyone else in the company as well. And that's a huge component of conscious leadership, because what everyone follows and emulates what leaders do, how leaders act, and what they say. So it's important for leaders to embody the values of the company and make decisions, and very explicitly make decisions based on the purpose of the company and trying to achieve that vision, as well as work to take care of themselves and improve their own leadership, because this work is never done. It's something that we keep progressing on over our entire lives, getting better and better if we're doing it right. And that requires taking care of yourself as a leader, eating well, sleeping, exercising, connecting with people to relax and be energized for work. Recalling your own purpose regularly to motivate you for what you're doing here. Striving to make a positive impact on every situation, no matter how tough it is and no matter how big or small it is. And a way to think about doing this, that's a powerful exercise in the book, Conscious Capitalism, is when you interact with people, to embody your conscious leadership and to show the kind of future that's possible. Imagine everyone that you interact with is highly enlightened. Instead of judging them or thinking, or wondering whether you should believe what they're saying or trust them, just imagine them as highly enlightened. There's something for you to learn from every interaction, and see what opportunities come from that and how you're able to connect with individuals with that kind of a mindset.
Alexander, one of the things that discourages a team in any company is to see that the leader, as we say in Colombia, preaches but doesn't apply. What it means is that he or she communicates the higher purpose, but he does not live to it. What should an organization do when it has such a leader that it's basically theory?
So you're absolutely right. Leaders need to not only talk the talk, they need to walk the walk. Yeah. And we also like to say that they need to talk the walk. They need to say what they're doing to make sure it's clear to everyone what their actions represent. And they need to walk the talk. Whatever they say, they need to follow through on. And if there's a disconnect between what they're saying and what they're doing, there needs to be a process for that leader to either improve, get honest feedback about the gap between what they're saying and what they're doing, and get support to make changes on that, or for the company to have processes to elevate leaders that will fill that role. And that requires something that's a part of having a conscious culture, which is transparency and honesty and integrity, where individuals are willing and capable of giving that kind of feedback that may be tough to give and hear, but is so critical, and be there to support changes with leaders and changes with employees, both in themselves and, if necessary, in changing out who fills those roles, to make sure that you have the right leaders who have motivation from integrity in leadership roles in the organization.
Alexander, many of the qualities we claim to admire in leaders, strength or conviction, when they are exercised by female leaders, are seen in a negative perspective. And they often are called hysterical, bossy, or whatever. How can we stop this bias from happening? And I think this is very common, usual in Latin America.
Oh. That's an important challenge to take on, because there are different styles of leadership. There are different ways for people to embody conscious leadership. And I think this gets to the question before of how talking about love, empathy, and care can be seen as weakness in some ways. And I think the key is to show how making decisions based on these kinds of values, things that have been seen as more feminine in the past, but are really fundamentally human, just make us better decision makers and have positive impacts and outcomes on the company. And it requires a diversity of arguments and data and stories to be able to persuade people to this. But it is to show that this creates a stronger, more successful, and a more thriving organization, both in the long run and the short term. And to exclude them is actually to weaken the organization itself.
Alexander, let's talk about the work team that surrounds the conscious leader. How should he or she build that team so that it's really a good support for their actions? And how can he make it diverse in an era where selection processes seem to want only the same type of people?
It's a great question, because leadership doesn't only apply to the CEO or the president of the organization. Leadership actually applies to everyone on your team, all the way down. And there are a few things that you can do to develop the right leadership team, and especially a conscious leadership team. And the first thing is to start with the hiring process. Hire for values, character, and alignment of individuals with the purpose of the company, not just the skills that they bring to the table or their past experience. This is such a common mistake that companies make, but you can always teach skills, you can't teach values. And you need to make sure that you're developing leaders that are fully aligned with the purpose of the organization, have high integrity, and have the values that you want others in the company to emulate. After that, introduce conscious leadership training and developing the kind of culture you want in the organization into the onboarding for employees and to the training that they receive. Don't just invest in in educational programs around skills for production. Invest also in their emotional, spiritual, and systemic intelligences in the way that they're able to communicate and connect with one another. Then emphasize how important this is, or really not just emphasize, but show the importance of this by incorporating that into reviews for team members and leaders. Make it part of their performance metrics to accomplish certain goals related to the conscious leadership that you want to see, because that what you measure is what matters and what people are going to make changes around. And then lastly, give it time. So often we want to make changes right away. Especially as leaders, we want it done 2 weeks ago. But when you're talking about developing people, especially, you have to be patient. And it's not always linear progression. It's often 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But if you keep making these investments in your leaders, and if you keep coming in as a conscious leader to support them, you will see change over time and have the opportunity to develop a strong team that supports you and makes you a better conscious leader as well.
Alexander, in that sense, one of the things that you're looking for in your team is that they can tell you freely that you may be wrongdoing something as a leader. How do you ensure that you receive honest feedback from your team without fear of being punished, for example?
Well, I think there are 2 things that I've most often seen to develop that kind of culture. The first is for the leader to share their own mistakes first. Be the first one to criticize yourself and point out that you want that kind of feedback because you want to be better, and that you want that kind of criticism to improve what you're doing, not to tear you down or tear anyone else down, but to get better. But model that for others by criticizing yourself and showing where you've made mistakes and how you're going to work to improve it that others can see. And the second thing then that I've seen that's really powerful is to really show that you will take action on feedback that people receive or give to you. Don't just listen to it, write it down and put it in a drawer, but follow up with individuals when they give constructive criticism or when they give that honest feedback to say, here's what I plan to do. Check in with them later on about what you've been doing and ask for their feedback as to how you're doing to improve on that, to show them that you actually take what they say seriously, you appreciate it, and it's worth their time. Not only because you're not punishing them for it, but you're actually going to follow through on their suggestions for what to do.
Yeah. Alexander, the English historian and politician Lord Acton is the author of a famous phrase, "Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely." What strategies can a leader follow so that the freedom granted by power does not turn him into a person who believes he's above everyone else?
That is a great quote. And I think the way conscious leaders address it is by recognizing that they have limitations on their power. The best leaders and the best organizations have decentralized power, so that leaders may be coordinating what individuals do and setting objectives for the organization and teams, but they recognize that everyone in the organization is their own person that can make their own choices about where to spend their time, what to do. They have the opportunity to leave. They have the opportunity to lead their own way. And because of that, there's actually limited authority as a conscious leader. And that's a good thing because it brings other strengths, other skills that other leaders in the company are able to add to them. So it's recognizing that as a conscious leader, you don't have absolute power and not trying to accumulate it, because that's not good for the organization. It's not even good for you as a leader. I'll say, I think that anyone who's seeking absolute power is placing a heavy responsibility on their shoulders that they don't even need to have. Life is a lot better if you're a leader that recognizes that other people can carry responsibilities for you and you don't try to do everything.
Alexander, in his autobiography, Disney CEO Bob Iger says that when he was just a middle manager at the company, he felt he wasn't special, but that he had one quality. When someone gave him a task, things got done. Are we perhaps a bit full of leaders who are not good at getting things done? How can a leader work on that quality, on getting things done? Especially because what one sees from conscious capitalism is that it can easily remain in good intentions without leaders who are called into action.
I think the best leaders have that quality, that they do what I call wear bifocals. They have the ability to look at the big picture for one moment, and at the next moment they can get into the line by line or take on any responsibility necessary. Now, it may be the case that they don't spend a lot of time doing the hands-on work in the organization because they have to take care of the big picture stuff, but they should. But the best leaders that I know that I've worked with at Conscious Capitalism can do both and will do both. They will both work on the strategic plan for the organization, reviewing budgets, thinking about the 10-year, 20-year vision, as well as then go and help on their manufacturing floor. They will help clean up the office with people. They will do both because that's what it takes to be a really conscious leader.
Alexander, let's go back in time again. In that same interview we mentioned earlier at the beginning of this conversation, the one in 2017 in Forbes, you stated that when asked to share the 3 best pieces of advice you have been given, that they were take initiative, persist, and keep learning. Are those still the best pieces of advice that can be given to a conscious leader?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. I haven't reflected on those in a little while. So it was take initiative, persist, and keep learning.
Yeah, it's take the initiative, persist, and keep learning, yes.
You know, I've learned a lot, even myself, since then. So I would say those are great lessons for conscious leaders. I'll also add a few more that I've really learned over the last 4 years since then as well that I'd add on. One is the importance of focus and recognizing that saying no sometimes is the right thing to do, because by saying no, you're able to say yes to your higher purpose and better clarify what the organization is doing and clarify what other people's roles are to help them out and to be more successful. So, and focusing on your higher purpose and what really matters creates so much more value for the organization. And I'd also add in that, well, yeah, the one other thing I'll add in is the importance of working with people in order to get things done instead of working through them. And what I mean by that is it gets back to the point of decentralized power, recognizing that everyone can make choices for where they're going to work, what they spend their time on. And you get the best from people when you inspire them to want to do things out of their intrinsic motivation instead of extrinsic incentive structures, that is so much more powerful and leads to such stronger results and a stronger culture. So working with individuals in the organization and taking that mindset as a leader in order to accomplish as much as possible.
Mm-hmm. Alexander, today conscious capitalism, as you mentioned earlier, is a movement that is present and growing all over the world. From your global vision, do you think there are differences in the application of these principles in Latin American companies with our complex realities compared to what companies are doing, for example, in North America, in your country, or in Europe?
I actually think there's less of a difference in the way that these principles are being applied across companies and cultures than there is across industries and individual businesses within those industries. Because conscious capitalism is not a set prescription of activities for companies to do. We don't say, here's how much you should pay people, here are the policies your company needs to adopt, or anything like that. Conscious capitalism holds certain values that leaders and businesses are run on, having a higher purpose than just maximizing profit, stakeholder orientation rather than being focused on one stakeholder at the expense of others, conscious leadership, as we've been talking about, and conscious cultures where people can bring their full authentic selves to work and are better people from having worked at a company than if they hadn't been there. And the ways that these values are expressed by different companies, even in the same industry, are varied. And that's one of the strengths of the conscious capitalism movement. The way that one of our CEOs, Nancy Pausch from Envision IT, puts it is that we're not like-minded in that we all share the exact same views, but we are like-valued. And that creates incredible opportunities to apply these values in different ways, to test out different approaches, and to allow for different cultures, different purposes, and entirely different companies to thrive as conscious capitalists. So yes, there are lots of differences, not necessarily because of culture or country, but just because there are different ways to embody these values, even within a country itself.
Mm-hmm. Alexander, thank you very much for being with us today. We have selected a few questions we have been asked through the team's Q&A area. The first one is from Alfonso. Is this one: the conscious leader is supposed to be the one who always does the right thing for the right reasons. But how can you be sure that you are on the right side of history, that you're doing the right thing?
Certainty is a really tough standard to achieve with any decision. Even when you're whether it's making an investment decision or what product to launch, or making just the morally correct decision can be challenging sometimes given the complexity of situations. And more than saying that, I would actually rephrase Alfonso's description of being a conscious leader to, instead of it being that you always make the right decision for the right reasons, is that you're striving to make the right decision for the right reasons, and you remain committed to doing that, even when you know you will make mistakes. No one's perfect. No conscious leader has ever always made the right decision for the right reasons. But being a conscious leader means trying to do so, being committed to doing so, recognizing when that doesn't happen, learning from it, and doing better in the future. And with that kind of mindset, it actually helps strengthen one's own ability to be committed to this principle, instead of feeling as though you failed at one point and you have to sacrifice it and give up because you made a mistake or you did something wrong.
And Liliana asks, Alexander, should a leader make all his decisions dependent on what is most environmentally responsible, for example, or is sustainability not necessarily the most important standard for a conscious leader?
Great question. And I would go back to the tenet of stakeholder orientation to understand how to address this, because the environment is a stakeholder for all businesses. We have to be concerned with not just protecting the environment, but what's becoming a more common term, regenerating the environment. It goes beyond sustainability. And companies need to think about their impact on the environment for that reason, to create a more regenerative system. And that is one of many stakeholders that companies have. And the idea of stakeholder orientation is to get out of a fixed world or fixed sum mindset where in order to help the environment, we have to take away from customers or employees or investors, and instead find an alignment of interests, a win-win-win, where the environment wins and customers win and employees win and investors win and every other stakeholder as well. So yes, the environment should be at the forefront of business leaders' minds in making decisions, and it should be aligned with the interests and benefits to all of the other stakeholders of the company at the same time.
And finally, Alexander, David asks, many leaders in Latin America see the goal of turning their company into a conscious organization as a costly investment for which they do not see an immediate reward. Today, can we say that being a conscious company in the long run ends up being good business also?
Absolutely. In fact, one of the benefits of being a conscious business is that it generates savings and generates additional revenue. Not by definition there that you need to have the right products and service and sound administration, of course, but this is not about taking a smaller profit in order to do the right thing or adding expense just because it's the right thing. It's about recognizing the interconnection between doing right and doing well. That when you treat people with dignity, when you recognize their human nature and take care of all your stakeholders, you can find savings that you didn't expect before. You can find savings in lower HR turnover, in the need for less marketing, in the opportunity to reduce duplication of activities because people are focused on what's most important for the company instead of just what's been done before, as well as identify new opportunities to grow, to serve your existing customers, to serve new customers, and come up with new ideas that can generate additional revenue. So this is not just a do something to feel good philosophy. This is a do good things in order to do well. It is a business strategy that has led to companies like Whole Foods, Panera Bread, The Motley Fool, all becoming incredibly successful businesses based on these principles, not in spite of them.
Alexander McCobin, CEO of Conscious Capitalism, thank you so much for this conversation full of ideas and concepts we had today.
Good morning. Thank you so much for sharing this message with everyone who's going through this program, and thank you for all the work that you're doing to elevate humanity through business. And if there's anything else that I can do to support what you're doing or anyone else who's participating in this, feel free to reach out to me at alexander@consciouscapitalism.org. I'd be more than happy to talk with you and support you any way that we can.
Beautiful, Alexander. Thank you. Goodbye.